How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good. How many of you had class at 1? No one.
Meeting.
A meeting at 1, okay. So I will do my very best to get through all of the content. I think generally speaking, this workshop really needs about an hour and a half, so I'm going to cram it into an hour and try and even do it a little shorter so that people can get out. So I am going to ask that you hold your questions at the end. I did my best to try and answer some of the frequently asked questions throughout it. So just make a note if you have a question, and then we'll come back to them at the end, and then maybe we'll answer before we get there. If not, I'm happy to meet with you. But that way we can get through all of it, and if you have individual questions and you don't have to leave, you can ask me. If you have to leave, if you have to leave, then, you've got your advising handouts here. Feel free to come into our office. So my name is Jeannie Jaworski, and I'm the Director of International Affairs. Didn't work?
No.
Okay.
We're having problems.
Don't worry about it. We probably have enough copies here. So
Okay, because I'll take one and make a copy. Make some more
it looks like it might be okay, and I can also send it out by PDF afterwards.
Okay,
Thanks,
perfect,
Natasha.
of course.
So I'm the Director of International Affairs here, and so I get to have the opportunity to speak with students about OPT and CPT primarily through these presentations, and then you'll work with our wonderful advising team, Deborah and Jim, when you actually want to work on your OPT. So go ahead and go through here. I had trouble with this yesterday, so I can do a better job today. So here's our agenda. We'll start with defining what OPT is. We'll talk about your eligibility for OPT. An important calculation in that is your I-20 end date, so we'll talk about that, as well as the application timeline, submitting your paperwork, traveling on OPT, and then, like I said, we'll cover those frequently asked questions and then have time for you to answer or ask any questions that you have as well. So to get us started, somewhere else in this room. All right. So defining OPT, it's optional practical training, and it's the temporary employment for practical training directly related to your students, to your major area of study. So yesterday I did a presentation on CPT, which is curricular practical training. That's what you do while you're enrolled at NOVA in your degree program. For OPT, the majority of students will choose to do it at the end of their program after they complete their program. It is directly related to the major area of study, and basically this is the benefit that the government says, you did your degree here, we're happy that you did that, now we want to give you a chance to go out into the workforce, gain some additional skills, and then if I have the government agency hat on, so that you can go home. But of course, those skills may be something that you use for a future degree program or a job here in the United States as well. So there are 3 kinds of OPT. The first one is pre-completion OPT. And so your OPT time frame that you get for most students is 1 year. And so you can use that before you graduate if you wish. Think of your OPT 1 year bucket as like a bank account. You've got 12 months. You can use it before you graduate or after you graduate. But if you use it all before you graduate, you don't have any left after you graduate. And so most students, because CPT is an option while they're here, they choose to use CPT while they're in their degree program and OPT after they complete their program. But if you were to choose to do pre-completion while you're enrolled, that would be the type. We hardly ever do any pre-completion just because students would prefer to do CPT while they're here and save their OPT for after they graduate. Most common is post-completion OPT. So this is when, like I said, you work after you complete your program. One of the questions that students sometimes have is that they're submitting their application while they're still enrolled in the program, based on the timeline, and they say, so do I check pre-completion because I haven't graduated yet? No. That question on the application refers to what type of OPT you want. If you want to work after you graduate, that you're going to choose post-completion, even if you're still in your program at the time of the application. There is also a STEM OPT extension. Certain majors, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics majors, as designated on your I-20, qualify for an additional 2 years of OPT if they apply for and have an appropriate position. By a show of hands, how many of you know you're eligible for STEM extension? How many of you know you're not eligible for STEM extension? How many of you have no idea? Okay, so what you would do to find out is on your I-20, there's next to your major, there's going to be a number, 59.021, 63.078. Find that number, and then there's a list of STEM zip codes, and you can see if your number is on that list. And so that's the only way to find out. If your number is not on that list, no STEM extension. If your number is on that list, you do have the option to get a STEM extension. And the number is determined by the academic program, and it's used not just for this purpose. So it's called a zip code, and it's used by the registrar's office when they report things to like the national education department about what types of things our students are studying. And so it's used across the entire institution. So every single student in your program will have the same zip code. So it's not something you can just come to us and say, hey, give me one of those good ones that gets 2 extra years. So, as we mentioned, we're going to talk about OPT post-completion here. So eligibility for post-completion is that you must be in legal F1 status when you submit your application. So there are sometimes students who are on like an H-1B or an H-4 visa who want to get OPT. They're not able to do that, even if it's legal for them to study here. The only way you can get OPT is if you're in F1 status at the time of your application. You must have been lawfully enrolled full-time for at least 1 academic year. So again, those students who maybe were in H-4 before, they're still accruing lawful status. That's no problem. They're meeting the eligibility, but they have to have the F1 status when they apply. You have to have a valid passport with at least 6 months validity into the future. The good news is for many students, you can apply here in the United States if you need to get an update. You have to have an unexpired I-20. So this is just a cautionary tale to all of you. Keep an eye on those I-20 end dates because one of the most devastating things that can happen is that you forget to check your I-20 end date. It expires, but you're not done with your studying. At this point, there's almost no opportunity for you to get OPT because you have to go through a reinstatement process, and by the time that takes to process, it's going to be too late for you to apply for OPT. So really stay on that I-20 end date. If you're going to study even 1 day after what's listed on your I-20 end date, you need to file for an extension with our office. You must have not used more than 364 days of full-time CPT at your current degree level. So part-time CPT, no problem. If you've had 365 days, you've had 900 days of part-time CPT, it's not a problem. The issue is if you have full-time CPT and you have 365 or more days. And that's at your degree level. So if you're currently, who are my bachelor's students in the room? Any bachelor's undergrad? 3 masters? 1 doctoral, all the rest? Okay. So if any of you who are in a bachelor's, this is your second bachelor's, your master's, if this is your second master's, doctoral, this is your second doctoral program, whatever you did in your previous program at that same level still counts. So it's not just a new degree, it's at that level, okay? And so again, if you had anywhere from 0 to 364 days full-time, no problem, don't worry. If you had any number of part-time, don't worry. You only have to worry if you had 365 or more of full-time CPT. Okay. In most cases, as I mentioned, students want to use this in their last semester. For the doctoral students in the room, there might be a little bit of variation in that. If you want to continue to work on dissertations, you can apply early and still have it be considered post-completion OPT if you'd like. So, as I mentioned, here's that I-20 end date. On your I-20, it's going to be listed in this 3rd box under Program of Study. It'll show when you started and when you will end. This I-20 end date is critical for a number of things with OPT. As I mentioned, the first one being able to apply, because if it's expired, you cannot apply. But it's also critical for determining when you apply. So the I-20 end date is used on the application timeline. It's the most important date because it determines when the earliest you can apply for it and when the latest you can apply for it is. So your 2020 program end date when we issue it, it's just a generic number. So for undergrads and doctoral students, we usually use 4 years. Masters, we usually use 2 years. And we just do it a generic number because we don't know exactly when you're going to complete your studies. So you have to keep an update on that, and most students will have to modify it. You might have to shorten it a few days, you might have to lengthen it a few days, you might have to shorten it a whole semester, you might need to lengthen it a year. Whatever you need to do to make sure it's accurate, but it has to represent the last day of your final term. So not graduation, not commencement, not the last day you stop going to classes, but based on the academic calendar, what is the last day of your final term in the study? Your advisor has to certify that. So you'll note on our application, there's a place where it has the advisor signing off, and what they're doing is they're telling us when your last day is. Again, kind of like the majors and the zip codes, there's no fudging this. There's a right answer and there's a wrong answer, and so your advisor needs to provide what that correct date is. So, up in the corner you'll see fall 2018 examples. Is anyone completing their program this term? Fall, December rather? Okay.
I may possibly finish my work, but I'm not sure about the different stage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you might want to pay attention to this timeline, or you may want to look beyond. Anyone completing next May?
Next May I should be done.
Probably.
Yeah.
Okay. And is everyone else further out? Yeah. Okay. So I have 2 sets of examples here: fall 18 and winter 18, just so you can pay attention. Even now, there may be some from summer, and I understand that, but even if the dates are slightly off because you might graduate fall 19 or winter 2020, the timeline should be about the same. So hopefully this will kind of give you an idea of when you need to apply. So again, we start with that program end date. That's going to be the last day of your final term. And from there, we count 90 days back. So 90 days before your program end date is your first day that you may apply for OPT. So that's the earliest that you may apply is 90 days before your program end date. And then, I don't know if the clicking works. So in the example of this semester, if your program end date is December 9th, which is the end of the fall term for most programs, 90 days before then was September 10th. So if you were applying this semester, September 10th would have been the earliest you could have submitted your application to our office. Then the next important number is when the last, your 60 days after your I-20 end date. And so that's the last day that USCIS must receive your application. So they will not accept it even 1 day after that. And it's not postmarked, it's received by. So that's why it's really important to use like a FedEx or something that's going to guarantee delivery by a certain date. So in our example of fall 18, 60 days after our program end date is February 7th, so that will be the day by when USCIS would need to receive your materials. So the time between December 9th and February 7th is considered your grace period. And that's true whether you're applying for OPT or not. 60 days after you complete your program is always your grace period. The unique thing about OPT is that's also the time frame when you must start your OPT. So those are the only dates you get to choose for an OPT start date. Now, OPT start date may not mean your work start date, but it should always start before or on your work start date. So you might not start your work for another, few weeks after this, but you cannot start before your OPT start date. It's always going to be your grace period. So in this example, the very first day you could start working on OPT would be December 10th, and the very last day that you could start working or have your OPT authorized rather would be February 7th. So another deadline to keep in mind that doesn't necessarily fall in a certain place in this is that USCIS must receive your application no later than 30 days after the date was created by our office. And so when we create it, you've got 30 days to get it to USCIS. If they receive it 31 days, they will deny it. They're very strict about this. We've never had a success story where someone does it late and they turn it over. So just using the exact same timeline for winter so that you can see what it might look like. Program end date that day for most programs is May 4th. Going back 90 days is going to be February 3rd, so that would be the earliest that you could apply for OPT. Going forward 60 days after your program end date, the latest day USCIS may receive your application is going to be July 3rd. And again, your grace period is May 4th through July 3rd. And that means that's when your OPT start date may be located, is within those dates. Again, USCIS must receive it, 30 days after the date we create your OPT I-20. Okay. So, one of the most confusing things for OPT for students is how to pick their start date. So what we recommend is that you average about 100 days for processing, because our processing time in Office of International Affairs is 7 business days. And then usually most students choose a FedEx option, so it's about 3 business days, or 3 days for like a FedEx to deliver it. And then USCIS, they have a 90-day processing time. And so when you're thinking about when you want to submit your application, you should submit it about 100 days before you want to have your OPT start date. So looking at what that looks like again with our examples, go back to the slide. So let's take a look at fall 2018 examples. And just because we're already in fall 18, let's say you attended this presentation today and you decide on Monday I'm going to turn in my application materials. So in the corner we have October 1st is the day you submitted your materials. So your program end date didn't change. It was still December 9th. 60 days didn't change. It's still February 7th. But because you turned your application in on October 1st, 100 days, and that's what we just talked about as our processing time, is January 2nd. So that would be 100 days for processing for your OPT application. So then this last box, and this is part of the application every single student will have to choose, is what day do you want to start your OPT. So we recommend that you choose a date after this, because on average it takes 100 days to process. We've identified that 100 days is January 2nd, so we say you should not pick a day before January 2nd, okay? But you only have until February 7th. So that's kind of the window you now have in choosing what you want your OPT start date to look like. All right? So going back to this slide, this is why it's tricky for students, because you should consider when you're choosing your start date, when do I think that I might start a job, and how long do I think it would take for me to find a job? So if you pick a start date that's too early, you're going to start accruing unemployment time. And on OPT, you can have a maximum of 90 days of unemployment. If you pick a date that's too late, then you might be applying for jobs and they say, yes, we want you to start in 2 weeks, and you're going to say, well, I have another 2 months before my OPT is processed. And they're probably not going to hold that job, so then you're missing out on opportunities there. So what's just right? There's no right answer. And this is the hardest part of working with students on OPT, is they want us to pick the date. We don't have a magical way of knowing when you're going to get a job or when your application is going to be processed. You just have to pick something and go with it, okay? And then communicate to future employers when you expect to receive your approval. So let's take a look at another example using the winter 2019 date. So your program end date, again, didn't change. For most programs, if they complete in May, it's going to be May 4th. 60 days didn't change. That's July 3rd, so that is the latest OPT start date you may choose. Now for this one, we don't have an example of when you're going to submit your application. So we can't do a real test to see, well, what's 100 days from the day you submitted. But what I can tell you is that Monday, March 25th is the last day we suggest that you submit your application to our office for processing. And the reason for that is because 100 days after Monday, March 25th is July 3rd. And so if you submit it after Monday, July 25th, there's a chance that you're going to lose out on OPT time because you still have to choose that same day for processing. And so let's say you wait really long, okay? Let's say USCIS does not receive your application until July 1st. They're still going to take their sweet time and do those 90 days. And so that means that you've just lost 3 months of your OPT eligibility, okay? Because you're not going to get your card until July, August, September, October, but you're not going to get any extra time to fulfill your OPT. Does that make sense? Okay. So, submitting your paperwork. We talked about this. This is the processing time. 7 days in our office, 7 business days in our office, 3 days to ship, 90 days by USCIS, 100 days beforehand. Application requirements. So we have an OPT application form on our website, so you have to submit that. With it, you have to submit your completed I-765 form. We only accept typed forms. The reason for that is that USCIS uses a machine to read it, If you type it, there's a good chance that they won't deny it based on an error, but if they're using handwriting scanning, there's a very good chance that they will misread something, and they may say, oh, that's not accurate, you forgot to do something, and then they'll deny it on that basis alone. Has anyone had OPT before? How many of you have had OPT? Okay. So it is a brand new form that just came out, and it is the most complex OPT form I've ever seen in the 8 years I've been doing this, and they change them pretty frequently. This one I think it's 7 pages long. The previous one was 2 pages long. So congratulations, you all get more administrative burden. But this one, once you have copies of any I-20 you've ever had with CPT or OPT. And so you'll have to go back to your previous university, see if they have it, or maybe you were a good student and saved every single thing like you were supposed to. If not, you can go back to your universities and see if they have it. But every single time you pursue CPT or OPT, you need to submit a copy of that. They also want copies of any previous EAD cards. So if you've previously had OPT, they'll want a copy of that old EAD card. They want a copy of your current I-94 record. That's something you pull from online for most students. Some of you might have a card that you received if you came in through boat or driving. They want 2 passport photos. And they, of course, have the guidelines for what those should look like. Go to a Walgreens or CVS and they can help you. Check or money order. Currently the fee is $410. It is proposed to increase again, but currently this is the fee, and it's a check or money order. There is an option to pay by credit card. So that's pretty new within the last year. USCIS started accepting credit card payments. For our office, we will not let you submit that to our office because we don't want the liability, because it's just, like you putting in your credit card information, and so we don't want that in our office. So if you submit your packet to our office and we note that there's a missing check, you can just tell us because you're going to do the credit card processing. Passport copy, F1 visa unless you're Canadian or Bermudian. Okay, so I'm sorry. And then the last option is the G1145 form. This is optional, but I encourage most students to do it. It's how you get text and or email updates on the status of your application. So it's the fastest way. Otherwise, you'll have to wait for them to mail something to you. All right, so we talked about processing time. Just another reminder, in our office, 7 business days. I also want to talk about the advising that we offer in our office. We have drop-in advising from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. and then by appointment on Fridays by emailing INTL. You can either call or walk in, but that's how you can see an advisor about any questions that you have about OPT. And our location is just upstairs. So application reminders. So we have a guide, and I think it's like 8 pages long as well, and it goes step by step for the new OPT application. So it's going to be posted on our website. I'm actually making the final revisions today, and then it'll be up there before I send you the follow-up email from this session. And so do review that when you're filling it out, because there are things that are not intuitive, such as anytime something doesn't apply to you, the new form requires you to put NA or none. They do not want you to just leave it blank. And so if you read our guide, that'll be something that you see in there. If you don't read the guide, you'll miss that, and you may have your OPT denied. Do not come to our office and ask how to complete the form before reading this guide. So sometimes we have people come to our office and they just print out, it's like 7 pages, so I can understand why it's overwhelming, but go step by step. If you come to our office with a blank form and say, so how do I complete this? We will give you the printed guide and say, good luck, come see us with any questions that you have. It really is the expectation that you use that guide. In the future, I hope to have videos that go over each page. So that you can use that, but we just simply don't have the advising staff to read a document to you that's already there. Do check and double check all materials before you submit them. And don't assume that we're able to confirm your applications are perfect. And so we're here to help be an extra set of eyes, but ultimately you're the one submitting your application. You're the only one responsible for making sure that it's correct. We do have a checklist we go through to do our best to kind of be a backup. But if something is missed and you submit it, that's your responsibility, and you are the one who's going to face the unfortunate denial. Do submit your application with enough time for the 100-day total processing. And please Do not get mad when we tell you that we will not expedite your application. As I tell students, every single student is the most important student to us. We will not prioritize your documents over another student's documents, but as a courtesy to you, we will not prioritize their documents over yours. So we don't do any expedited processing in our office, so it's your responsibility to turn it in within the guidelines. Very important. Do pick up your I-20 as soon as we tell you that it's ready. So those of you who have had OPT in the past, did you have it through NSU? No. So in the past, we did ship OPT applications for students. We do not do that anymore because there is a precedent saying that if we ship it, we're responsible for it, and we simply can't take that liability. So we create your I-20, and we call you and email you when it's ready to be picked up. You pick it up and then you ship it yourself. So because you have 30 days to get it to USCIS, it's really important that you come get it from us quickly and that you ship it quickly. If you wait a few weeks to pick it up from us, there's always a chance that you won't be able to ship it in time within that 30-day window. Okay? I think this just says don't wait. Yeah, don't wait. Okay, so another big topic on OPT is traveling. So once you have filed your application, we strongly recommend that you do not travel until, the Wi-Fi animations were a good idea for this. Your OPT has been approved, okay, and so remember it takes about 90 days for USCIS to approve it. You received your EAD card, and you have secured employment or offer of employment. So this is the expectation for once you file. It's the safest way to go. A lot of students, because it takes 90 days or 100 days to process, they want to go home before, like they want to split their application, go home, have a break, and then come back to start their employment search. So if you want to go that route, what we do, the regulations do technically allow for you to travel before then if you've received this notice of action. So this notice of action comes about 2 weeks after you file your paperwork. About 2 weeks you should get a notice, and you may choose to travel as long as you have this, along with your other documents like your I-20, your passport, and all of that. It is risky. There is a chance that a CBP officer will say, well, you're supposed to have employment, and so you cannot enter because you don't have proof of employment. Another risk that you take is that even though 90 days is standard processing, sometimes they're faster. And so if you leave the country and they issue your EAD card, the moment your OPT is listed as approved in the system, it is the expectation that you have your EAD card and proof of employment anytime you want to travel. And so if it's processed while you're out of the country and then you want to come back in and they see that it's been approved, your EAD card may be sitting in a mailbox here in the United States waiting for you, but you don't have it when you're trying to cross the border. They may say, nope, you're approved OPT, that means you must show me your EAD card to get into the country. So this is a risky option because you have no idea how long it's going to take for USCIS to process your application. So what we recommend is students don't leave the country until their EAD card has been received and they've got a job offer. But we understand sometimes students want to make the choice to leave before then, but under no circumstances should you leave before you receive this letter. If you do leave before you receive this letter, it's a good chance that when the adjudicators receive your application and process it, they'll see your departure record through the system, and they'll assume that you have abandoned your OPT application, and they will not process it, but they'll go ahead and still cash your check. Okay? All right. Okay, so when you travel on OPT, you do need to have that unexpired passport, your valid visa. Still, just like with studying, if your passport or your visa is unexpired, you need to apply for a new one through your embassy. You need your valid I-20 with Travis signatures. This is a part of the regulations that's actually different for OPT, but the good news is NSU tries to set you up for success. So at NSU, we require students to get a signature every 6 months. Even while they're studying. The regulation while you're studying is actually 12 months, but during OPT it's actually 6 months. So to avoid confusion, we just tell all students, whether you're studying or on OPT, 6 months. Make sure you have that travel signature. Now with OPT, you can do it anywhere in the United States. So plan ahead, because it's not simply dropping by Corvus and getting that signature. You may need to ship us your I-20, have us sign it, and then have us ship it back to you. So you might need to plan ahead with that, okay? Your EAD card, your proof of employment or the offer of employment. The EAD card, a lot of students get nervous because when you receive it, on the bottom it says not for reentry. And so they think that that means they won't be permitted to reenter once they receive it. All that means is that this card itself doesn't give you the ability to enter. You have to have all those other things, your I-20, your visa, your passport. As long as you have those other things, your EAD card will be just fine. What did I just talk about? Did I talk about this already? The duplicate slide. So I think, yeah, once you filed your application, don't travel until your OPT is approved, your EAD card, and you've secured that employment or offer of employment. What's proof of employment? Well, a job offer letter, pay stubs once you're working. You can just get a letter from your human resources department. If they're a company that hires a lot of international students, they'll know exactly what you need. If not, you can just coach them, and of course, you're always able to have them call our office if they need help. So here's the FAQ portion of things that students usually ask us, and that is, what kind of employment may I have on OPT? So there's quite a bit of options here for you to have. So regular paid employment, obviously, you get hired by NSU, they want you to work here, fantastic. But it's also possible to have multiple short-term employers. So we see this with like gigs for comedians, actors, musicians, things like that. What's important with that one is that you have really detailed records of when you did the work, who paid you, and that kind of thing. Work for hire is contractual, and so there may be tax implications for this, but for OPT, it's perfectly fine for you to be your own independent contractor. Self-employment is also okay, but you want to make sure you have all the appropriate licensing. Two other considerations. OPT is a fixed term, so you only have 1 year, maybe up to 3 years, but you can't have self-employment on STEM. So STEM requires you to use it either by company, so you can't use it. So that means your business has a 1 year lifespan. What's the plan for after you transition? Are you trying to keep the business afloat? You're going to need someone who has a more permanent immigration status to be able to help you with that. Okay? Because F1 status is non-immigrant intent, and so you should not use that as a way to get employment in the United States or stay in the United States. An employment agency, there's been a lot of talk about employment agencies right now. USCIS, actually it was SEDP, put something on their website saying that there had to be a bona fide contract employer and employee relationship, and that these type of employment agencies did not meet the requirements. So we see this a lot in IT-related jobs or like project management jobs where there's like an overarching company and they have clients who need things like IT folks and project managers. And so you're hired by this big company, but then you go do work at the other company who needed your expertise. And so there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not that's appropriate. Very recently, they did come out and clarify that yes, that is appropriate, but there are expectations in terms of being able to be at a physical location, have a supervisor who's watching their work there, and that kind of thing. So has anyone heard about this? Has anyone been watching this and get worried about that? Okay, well good. And I don't mean to worry you, but they did come out and clarify that it is okay as long as it meets the requirements. And last but not least, volunteer work. So this is another one students always ask about because you only have 90 days of unemployment. And so if you're nearing that day of 90 days of unemployment, they say, well, can I just volunteer? In theory, yes, OPT does allow for volunteer work. However, there are also U.S. labor laws in the United States. And so for OPT, it has to be tied to your major and appropriate for your degree level. And for volunteer labor laws, they can't have you do work that someone else should be getting paid for and just not pay you for it. So in theory, it's acceptable, but in practice, I can't think of a real example where you're doing volunteer work that it meets the requirements of your degree level and major, and they're not paying you for it on a long-term basis. Some options might be some like charitable organizations or nonprofits where like their entire staff is volunteer. That might be one thing that you could do. But what you can't do is just find a company that says, well, we won't pay you, but we'll let you do work. That would be a violation of the labor laws. The good news is that the violation of the labor laws doesn't really impact you, it impacts your employer. They're the ones who are going to get their hands slapped. But we have seen that USCIS is sending students emails asking for them to give more information about their volunteer positions when they list it as a volunteer position in the portal. So just something to be aware of. Yes, it's technically allowed, but it's not cut and dry. Am I permitted to study while on OPT? So, like a lot of the regulations, this is an area of gray. There's one document from an agency that doesn't even exist anymore called INS, which is Immigration and Nationalization Services. In 1993, I don't know if any of you maybe weren't even born then, a student working full-time may attend school part-time. But then they also said that students who are post-completion may not attend full-time. So that's kind of what students use as a guideline, but what's the difference between part-time and full-time? Is it, is there a difference between being enrolled in a degree program versus just taking classes? There's no guidance on that, so what we recommend is, especially if you have goals of later getting H-1B or permanent residency, talk to an immigration attorney for their guidance and their best expertise. Another question we get a lot is who determines whether or not a job is appropriate for OPT? Because again, it has to be at your degree level and your within your major of study. So the regulations do not require us to do that, and in fact, we will not do that because we have really, I don't know if you guys know the quote is no skin in the game. Like there's nothing can happen to us if we do it wrong. So we want you to be really confident in making the decision on if it's tied to your degree or not. Your employer should really be the one that should help you make this decision because they also have to file paperwork about what they're having you do, what they're paying you, all of that information. And that's true for all people, not just international students, but all individuals. So they should help you identify, is this appropriate credential for you to have in this job and at the major you have. Okay? I know that's not really a helpful answer, but it's the one I got. So I heard that you cannot be unemployed for more than 90 days. Just a note that on STEM extension, it does go up to 150 days aggregate. What happens after that? So for better or for worse, our office is not responsible for tracking or reporting on that. But there is an OPT portal that you all will have access to where you have to report your employment. So the only way the government can track whether or not you are working and if you've used all of your days is with you putting in employment information. So if you do not report an employer either by emailing us and asking us to update it in CVIS or by doing it yourself in the OPT portal, if you don't do that and you get 91 days, they can see that information. Currently, they are not taking action on it, but there have been a lot of firsts in the last few years with immigration. It would not surprise me if in the next year we see them say, okay, as soon as you hit 91 days, we're terminating your record. Okay, so make sure that you're reporting your employment to us and or through the OPT portal. You'll get a link to the OPT portal as soon as your OPT has been approved. Okay. Another thing to note actually before I move on is that there is a new rule related to unlawful status, and with that rule, it used to be that unlawful status only started accruing once an agency had made a decision on a benefit. So for example, let's say you went to apply for OPT and they said, whoa, you fell out of status a year ago. Not only are you not getting OPT, you're now accruing unlawful status. So anytime you stay here on is considered unlawful and you may be subject to barring from entering the country if you stay too long. They just released this, I think it was in April when they put it out, in August when it took into effect, that they're backdating unlawful presence. This is bad news for you guys. I'm so sorry. I think it's terrible. And I think the good news is that people are going to sue them to try and get it to be changed. But right now it is the law. The law is that your unlawful presence is backdated to when you fell out of status. Okay, so in this example with OPT, what does that mean? Let's say you did not get a job for 90 days. You get a job on the 92nd day. What that means, though, is that in order to maintain status, you cannot have more than 90 days of unemployment. So day 91 was when you fell out of status. But you got a job on day 92, you started working, you worked, let's say you have 3 years of work, you're good. Well, actually, no, you wouldn't get approved that. Let's say you have 1 year, you go to apply for your STEM extension or an H-1B or permanent residency, and you've been doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're doing your OPT, but they go back and they say, oh, but you had 91 days of unemployment. That means you fell out of status back on day 91, which means for the past 200 days, you've been accruing unlawful status, because it goes back to the date when you fell out of status now. So it's really important that you keep up to date on this, as well as all of the regulations. So, those reminders that we send out to you, make sure you're paying attention to them, because the government has made it harder for you to stay in status, and they made the penalties for what happens when you fall out of status more strict, unfortunately. Okay, one other question I didn't answer was, do I have to have a job before I apply for OPT? Absolutely not. You apply for OPT based on the timeline we gave, and then you find your job. You can start looking for your job while, it's processing, but you cannot start until you have your OPT start date and your EAD card in hand. So what questions do y'all have for me now?
What if my visa is expired before applying OPT?
You do?
Yeah, my visa is expiring in June 2019, and I'll be eligible for OPT after 2020.
So you don't have to have a valid visa because you have valid status, but if you leave the country, you'll have to get a new visa and come back in. And so
after my visa expiring, right?
Yes, if you want to leave. In that situation, what can kind of be tricky is if you want to leave the country before your OPT is approved, you'll probably not be able to apply for a new visa because you don't have OPT approved, and so you're going to be stuck. So I really recommend you either get your visa before then, or you wait until after your OPT is approved and you have a job. Okay. Good question.
Sorry. So there's a 1099 status, which is like independent contractor, like W-2 employee. This might be biased towards Canadians. For an OPT, can you be on 1099?
Yes.
Okay. But then in order for the employer to sponsor you, you have to be on a W-2.
I don't know about employment, like you mean through the T and the T visa through Canadians for like the.
So like you said, like H-1B.
Yeah, H-1B.
I have to be on a W-2, right?
Well, H-1B is in a whole different process, so we don't really advise on that.
Okay.
I guess a quick save the date, we do have during International Education Week, we bring in an immigration attorney. He's going to be here on Thursday, November 15th in Knight Auditorium at noon, and we will videotape this presentation, but he goes over H-1B, permanent residency, EB, all of those other ones.
Okay.
I'm only here to talk about Fs.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Another question I have, sorry. You said F1 visa except for Canadians on one of the slides. So we don't have to submit it, even though I am on F1 status.
You have F1 status, but everyone else who's not Canadian or Bermudian, they have a visa in their passport.
Oh, okay.
So you won't have that, so,
Okay.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Anyone else?
I traveled with B1, B2, but then I got admission and converted my status here, but I really don't have the student stamp on my
Yeah.
passport, but what's my identity?
So you would want to submit your I-94, and that would be fine, because your I-94 would have been updated when you got the email saying you're
Yeah, I
changing the
got a new
status.
I-94
Yes,
number.
yes, so that's fine.
I can travel with that number?
Well, if you can leave, but you can't come back in. So anytime you want to enter the United States, unless you're Canadian or Bermudian, you must have a valid F1 visa. So what you have now is perfectly fine to be here. It's perfectly fine to apply for OPT. But if you leave the country and want to come back in, you're going to have to go to an embassy and apply for an F1 visa. Yeah, good question.
Is there any way of checking the status of your OPT application online?
Yes, there is, but for the most part, it's going to say your application has been received. It's in processing. Your application has been received. Yeah, right. Like it takes. They don't give you like now it's in this hand, now it's in this hand. They don't give you any update other than received, approved, received, denied.
Pretty much. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But yes, there is, and that G1145 form will give you the most up to date information.
And OPT start date, is that something that we put in there, or is that something that happens? How do we?
You pick it. So on the NSU application, that's these boxes. Oh my goodness. Innovation seems like a good idea at the time. These boxes are straight from our application. So this is when you pick your start date. So we help you get there by asking you, like giving you the parameters, like when does it end, what's 60 days, and then you have to pick the date. But I would say that's the number one thing people come to our office saying, can you just help me pick it? we'll talk you through it, but ultimately, no, we can't tell you what's the right date. There isn't a right date.
Just one more. This might not be related to this, but in terms of taxes and reporting your income on OPT, do we have to pay Social Security taxes? Because I think one of my friends who is on his OPT said you don't have to.
So, no, you don't, but your employer may not be set up to treat you differently than a resident taxes. And so they may pull it out, but then everyone does have child taxes. So what would happen is that when you file your taxes, your refund would just be bigger. If you're at a company that knows not to withhold, your refund will be smaller because you're not getting anything back. They didn't take anything from you. Good questions. What do you think, guys? Anything else?
Can I ask you some CPD question?
Let's make sure the room's good on OPT, and then absolutely after. Any other questions about OPT?
So, as a full-time employee on OPT, can we work for more than 40 hours, or it has to?
Nope, you can work for more. Yeah. You can also have multiple employers, but you should have a primary employer who meets the requirements. And that can be more important when you get to STEM because there are additional requirements for STEM. We don't focus on STEM here. Usually there are kind of different things that exist, but usually by going through the experience of doing OPT, those of you who are eligible for STEM, you'll have more specific questions that it would just be too confusing to kind of burden you with at this stage.
In terms of, if you don't qualify for STEM, is there any other way of extending your OPT?
No, not your OPT. I mean, there are certainly other ways to extend your stay in the United States by starting a new degree program, finding a different status to go to, but there's no way to have additional OPT time except for STEM.
If an employer wants me to get the OPT, but he don't have the job position right now, he needs to open one and then make an open hiring, or he just can hire me?
So, it depends on what the position is, but they can just hire you, depending, I mean, like government, there's rules for posting. A lot of big organizations have their own personal, policies for it, but if it's just OPT, it doesn't have to go through the same H-1B sponsorship where they have to prove that no Americans are able to do it, yada, yada, yada. So if he wants to hire you for OPT, he can just open a position and just give it to you if he, yeah. Anything else? Well, I'm glad to hear that most of you are planning pretty well in advance. So there'll be, 5 more opportunities for you to hear this presentation. If you'd like, we'll also make recordings and make them available so that you can see it. And of course, advising in our office, the advising hours, go ahead and pick up a form here if you'd like. There's also a copy of the presentation. Please make sure you sign in. There's 2 forms, one back here, one here. That's how we'll make sure to get the resources to you after the fact, okay? Any other OPT questions? All right. Well, you're all free to go. Thank you so much. And if you've got CPT, I'm happy to answer it for you. Have a good day. Thank you. And it's almost the weekend. Can you just stop this recording for it? Thank you. Excuse me, one second.